Outsourcing is seen by many as one of the pillars of management and economic practices.
Yeah, that's true, Mike. But it's also one of the most difficult management topics to discuss. In many organizations, the word outsourcing is not an economic or management concept, but an emotional and political one. After all, when hard-edged slogans such as non-core and zero added value are applied to jobs, they are also being applied by default to the people who have been doing those jobs. As a result, it is very difficult to avoid emotion and value-laden opinions. Unless very specific management actions are undertaken, many organizations will find that outsourcing, like so many other management trends, can be a strategic and financial disaster.
Outsourcing is defined as the procurement of products and services from sources that are external to the organization. In other words, outsourcing is a contractual relationship with an outside vendor to assume responsibility of one or more organizational functions. It is especially common and widespread in the area of information technology, where issues concerning outsourcing are quite controversial. And traditionally, cost reduction has been the overwhelming motivation and perceived payback for outsourcing. But today, cost reduction still tops many priority lists, but the goal of strategic value has come to rival it. Which leads to the question, does outsourcing allow organizations to reduce high overhead costs and thus improve overall performance?
Or does outsourcing weaken an organization's position to innovate strategic uses of technology and to keep up with competitors' innovations? To get a handle on what organizations can and cannot accomplish in outsourcing, we caught up with Dean Meyer. Viewers will recall from his previous appearances on our program that Dean, founder of N. Dean Meyer & Associates, is a pioneer in applying science to the art of building high-performance organizations.
Dean, thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure.
By now, outsourcing has become part of our language and part of our culture. After all, doesn't every organization buy some products and services from outside vendors?
Well, sure, of course, every organization buys products and services from outside vendors, but outsourcing has a special meaning. Outsourcing means replacing what would normally be an internal staff function with a vendor. It means hiring a vendor to deliver all of the products and services of a given function, like IT or human resources or perhaps finance. Sometimes it's the entire function, like the entire IT department, or sometimes it's a function within a department, such as applications development in India, or help desk in Indonesia. It means the vendor provides all of the different internal products and services for a given function.
From your perspective, Dean, what accounts for the incredible popularity of outsourcing today?
I wonder about that. When I wrote my book on outsourcing in 1999, I thought it might be just a management fad, that the pendulum was swinging too far and that it would drop back to a more rational center point. But it seems that interest in outsourcing has not faded a bit, despite somewhat questionable fundamentals. Now, it may be that there's a sense of dissatisfaction in the executive community with certain staff functions. Maybe they don't know how to fix it. Maybe they lack patience to fix it. And then along comes a vendor with a very well-trained account representative, a very glossy pitch, and some compelling arguments. And here we are outsourcing.
You've got a lot of experience working with information technology. What is it that makes IT and information systems so popular for outsourcing?
Right, IT is a very common target for outsourcing. I think part of the reason is that executives consider IT to be non-core, not very strategic to the business. And it's true that there are some aspects of IT that are really commodity, running the network, hosting applications, deploying desktops, all of that is pretty much commodity work. But I think your viewers understand that there are other parts of IT that are highly strategic. And the more we can tailor IT to what's unique about our company and its strategies, the more strategic value we get. So I think it's somewhat a misconception that IT is a commodity and hence amenable to outsourcing. But I think there's another reason as well. IT is tough to manage. It's a very complex internal business within a business. I mean, look, it's got all kinds of layers of engineering, from networks and computers all the way up to applications and tools for thinking and information environments. It's got product line architecture issues. It's got heavy manufacturing, like the computer center. It's got support, like a help desk, and training. This is a complicated little business. And so it's awfully tempting to say there are companies elsewhere that know how to manage it better than we do. That's not necessarily true, because we have highly trained CIOs and leadership teams. But because it's tough to manage, I think it's tempting to turn it over to someone else.
Let me ask you about some of the financial claims that accompany the decision about whether or not to outsource a function, whether it's IT or human resources. The first thing we hear is that outsourcing will reduce costs. Now, is that really true?
That's a claim that I'd like to question. Look, these vendors have to make a profit, yes? For their shareholders. They're in business. So somehow you've got to pay them not only the true cost of the product or service, but a profit margin. In addition, they're going to layer on sales and marketing costs, costs that you wouldn't necessarily incur with an internal service provider. Meanwhile, you still have internal costs to manage the vendor, at a minimum to manage the contracts, but hopefully to manage their performance as well. So if all these costs add up to a 20% premium, then they'd have to be able to produce at least that, say 25% or better, in the way of efficiencies. They'd have to be at least 25% better than your internal staff to deliver real savings. Now, if you look at the fundamentals, how can they do that? They cannot do magic. It's very likely that you could achieve internal savings that are close to that without the vendor. For example, through consolidations of a decentralized staff function, through some hard-nosed management and business decisions. So the only way, in truth, that a vendor can deliver that much more performance is if there are economies of scale that cross corporate boundaries. This is the key. If you can share infrastructure with other corporations, then outsourcing makes sense.
Since our viewers are financial executives, Dean, let's continue with a couple of other dollars and cents issues involved in outsourcing. Many advocates of outsourcing claim that it provides greater financial flexibility since it converts relatively fixed costs into variable costs. Now that sounds reasonable, doesn't it?
It's another claim that I'd like to question. You see, these vendors aren't going to lose money, right? If in fact there really is an investment that has a life and it has to be paid back over that life, they're not going to lose money. They're not going to let you cancel midway through the payback period and find themselves with an asset that they can't deploy. So if costs truly are fixed, they're going to be asking you for long-term contracts with exit clauses that are really expensive. Nothing comes for free. You will pay for flexibility. Now, how much do you want to pay for flexibility? It's like asking how much insurance do you want. If you want to guarantee them a long-term contract, you're going to get a better rate than if you don't. But of course, we could do the same thing internally. We can amortize things more quickly, and we can buy flexibility in other ways. See, the right answer, whether you're an outsourcing vendor or an internal service provider, the right answer is this. We build capacity to the valleys, and we contract out for the peaks. That is, we build infrastructure and headcount to satisfy a base level of demand. And then we pay a price premium for contractors and vendor services when peak loads come along. Whether you do that internally or whether you ask the vendor to do that for you, that leads to your optimal cost structure given the degree of change in your environment, the amount of flexibility you need.
I suppose that discussion also involves operational flexibility. A company wants to buy only what it needs when it's needed. Now, doesn't outsourcing allow them to do that?
Yes and no. When you're managing an outsourcing vendor, flexibility comes through managing the statement of work. When you're managing internal staff, it comes through a priority setting or portfolio management process. My sense is it's a lot easier to shift the priorities of internal staff than it is to rework a legal contract and its statement of work. I'm not at all convinced that outsourcing is more flexible in the near term.
Maybe outsourcing makes sense, maybe it doesn't. But all other things being equal, it can improve an organization's financial picture, can it, by reducing headcount and improving liquidity?
This is a very short-term view. Reducing headcount means you turn your people over to the outsourcing vendor in the hopes that they'll fire them instead of you. If you've got to downsize, you got to downsize, and paying a vendor a price premium, a profit, to do your dirty work for you is not necessarily good for shareholder value. Either you pay that vendor, not just once, but forevermore, a profit on the services they deliver, or as an executive, you've got the guts to do what's right and size your organization to the needs of today.
I've got to admit, Dean, that you make a great case for taking a second look at the supposed benefits of outsourcing, but there are real management and organizational issues here. The office mailroom treats everyone in the company as a friend, but an outside vendor who runs the mailroom treats each of the organization's departments as a customer. Now that can make a big difference, can it?
Oh, absolutely. Vendors know that their survival depends on pleasing their customers. They're entrepreneurs, they're naturally customer focused. Sometimes internal staff feel like they've got an entitlement, that they've got a monopoly. People have to buy through them, or so they think. And so they may not be customer focused. They may actually feel that they're given a budget to do what's best for the shareholders, which is the opposite of customer focus. It means not respecting what your internal customers want to buy from you, but rather deciding for them what they'll have. So the whole paradigm of we're here to protect the shareholders from those unruly clients, it's our budget, we'll do what we think is right, is the opposite of customer focus and will actually induce outsourcing. It'll cause those clients to say, we don't want to do business with you. But I'll tell you, changing the internal staff's culture isn't that tough. Contrary to popular opinion, I know there are people who say it takes a generation to change culture. That's just not true. There are techniques for building a customer-focused entrepreneurial culture in less than 9 months within an internal staff function. So once again, you don't necessarily have to pay a vendor a huge profit margin in order to have customer focus. We can fix our internal service providers.
You need 50 copies of a business proposal. You go to corporate duplicating. Everything's got to be black and white, 8.5 by 11. On the other hand, you go to Kinko's and they ask you how you want it to look. Now, I know that standardization reduces costs, Dean, but sometimes one size doesn't fit all, does it?
You're absolutely right. Look, what is it that everybody in the company has in common? Not their mission, and hence not their role in corporate strategy. What they all have in common is all that boring administrative stuff that gets in the way of mission. So if an internal service provider, like IT or finance or HR, is looking for one size fits all, they're really missing the boat. And that again would induce people to look to outsourcing for more tailoring, for a deeper understanding. You see, these outsourcing vendors have account reps that are paid to spend their time with the clients, understanding the business, understanding unique requirements, and configuring solutions to match. Well, many internal service providers lack the equivalent of an account rep, a person who's paid not to deliver technology, but to know the business and know the clients, the people, the politics, the strategies, and configure custom solutions that fit their most strategic needs. But you see, again, this is something we can fix. Again, we don't have to throw a lot of money at other people's shareholders to do this. We need to teach our internal service providers that they need an account rep function that's trained to do the job.
Let's stay with that duplication example. It's 6 p.m. and you've got to have your 50 copies of the business proposal by tomorrow morning. But corporate duplicating has a rule. If you want it by tomorrow morning, you've got to let them know by 3 p.m. Now, isn't there a sense of flexibility and a sense of priority that only comes with outsourcing?
When you outsource, in theory, you buy what you want, you don't buy what you don't want. That's absolute control by the business over what they do and don't buy. And a lot of times internal service providers don't think that way. Again, they think it's their budget and they will decide priorities. Well, we can fix this as well. Our internal service providers have to understand they're there to serve customers, and that means a culture that is entrepreneurial. By the way, part of an entrepreneurial culture is making wise use of vendors. If vendors do offer a product or service that's better or less expensive than we can make it internally, I would hope that our internal staff would be the first to offer that as part of their product line. Not sending you off to the vendor, but rather procuring from the vendor and then integrating it and delivering it and supporting it internally. Now, this is what I call extended staffing, an alternative to outsourcing. Instead of throwing a whole function out to the vendor, you do business with your internal staff and let them choose when to make versus buy. And in that way, internal staff can offer you the best deal all the time.
I'm not sure I understand you, Dean. Are you saying that if you use extended staffing, that corporate duplication could actually provide the same service level and the same cost structure as outsourcing?
Whether it's the duplicating department, IT, HR, finance, whatever, they can offer a better deal. Because if the vendor can do it cheaper, they will be the first to bring that forward as their proposal. And they'll manage that vendor to our standards of excellence and ensure their delivery and learn enough to support it forevermore. On the other hand, if the vendor is not really less expensive in this particular case, they'll do it internally. So you will always have at least as good a deal as a vendor, plus you'll have people who work for your shareholders who know that business, managing that vendor, and ensuring that their products and services fit our corporate standards.
Elsewhere on this month's program, Dean, we're looking at companies that are considering outsourcing their accounts payable function. After all, who wants to manage an operation that is essentially transaction processing? Wouldn't outsourcing relieve financial executives from having to worry about what is essentially a service function?
Peters and Waterman, way back in Search of Excellence, talked about stick to the knitting. And that's another argument outsourcing vendors use. They say, look, you focus on your business. We're experts in IT or finance or HR. We'll handle that for you. You stick to your knitting. But you know what? When you look at it, are there any more executives knitting, as it were, after the outsourcing deal than there were before? You got the same people running the business before and after. But instead of having a CIO managing IT, for example, you've got a CIO or a procurement person managing the vendor contract. No more people knitting. So this is really a fallacy. There's no reason a corporation can't hire a competent CIO, CFO, a Chief Human Resources Officer, or whatever, to manage an effective function without diluting the team of executives managing the business.
Let's change our focus a bit, Dean. Let's talk about a manager whose department is competing with an outside vendor. That's increasingly common, isn't it?
Sure. But you know, every internal service provider is in competition with a vendor, ultimately. There are some who think they've got a monopoly. Okay, you've got to buy email from us because we're the corporate monopoly. You've got to buy network service. You've got to buy telephony from us because we're the corporate monopoly. But boy, is that the wrong way to think. So what happens? Dissatisfaction grows and grows and grows until they call for an outsourcing study. So all a monopoly really does is make it a 0-1 switch in terms of market share. It just means that you're either going to have it all or lose it all. So the best way to think, the signals you want to send to the troops are, we are not a monopoly. We must be the client's vendor of choice through performance. We must earn that business every day.
How can an internal department compete with an outside vendor? They know their product lines, they know their costs. That's a big advantage, isn't it?
It is. They can price the deal down to the penny. Meanwhile, internal staff may not be as competent. I mean, you know the game. The vendor comes along and says, listen, we can deliver 50% of what your internal staff are doing for only 80% of the cost. That's a 20% savings, right? You got that? Deliver half for 80%, and it looks like a cost savings. But the internal department can't come back and say, wait a minute, look at exactly what we are delivering and the cost of each of those deliverables. When you compare apples to apples, we're highly competitive. So it's really a challenge for internal service providers to think in terms of not budgeting in the traditional way, you know, for compensation and travel and training, not budgeting for the resources they need to do the job, but rather using the budget exercise as a way to price their products and services in a manner that's comparable to outsourcing. And then we'll understand what we're getting for a given level of budget. So the biggest challenge for countering outsourcing is understanding our internal products and services and understanding the costs of each.
Most internal service providers are used to justifying or defending their budget. They're not really equipped to offer their services in terms of deliverables, are they?
They're not. And yet this is a method and a set of tools that are easily acquired. It looks like this. Picture your budget as a spreadsheet. The columns represent cost factors, compensation, travel, training, licenses, etc., right? And the rows represent the things you want to do in the year ahead, your products and services. It'll take some learning and it takes some tools, but this is an entirely practical approach. It really transforms the budget process. It answers the question of, is outsourcing more or less economic? And it brings a business-like relationship to the negotiations between the executive team and a given internal service provider.
I guess what I'm wondering about is whether it's really comparing apples to apples or whether it's a matter of comparing apples to oranges. After all, don't most organizations call upon their internal staffs to do a lot more than just provide a service?
Yeah, this is the key. A lot of internal service providers are engaged in things like policy facilitation, or they get roped into community action programs or corporate initiatives that have nothing to do with running the internal business within a business. And they take these not insignificant costs of looking after the corporate good and amortize them into the costs of product and service delivery. So of course that's going to make them look expensive. And at the same time, it makes these corporate initiatives look free. So the corporation keeps asking you to do more and more because when price is zero, demand goes to infinity. You get more and more resources pulled aside for things other than running your business because it appears free. And you keep bearing those costs in the cost to the business units of your products and services, this is a death spiral.
Let me give you an example, Dean. Right now, everyone in the organization uses the same desktop computer and the same laptop computer, with standard software installed on each. An outside company says that it will provide these computers on an as-needed basis at a far lower cost than the internal group. The cost per installed computer is less. What else do you need to know?
It's true there are vendors that are very efficient at putting a generic PC on people's desks, so-called seat management. Now, of course, if we've got an entrepreneurial IT department, what are they going to do? Extended staffing. They'll use those vendors and call it their service offering. But they may adjust the burn, as it's called, that is the software on the PC. They may integrate it with our networks, and they'll support it. So they add value for a price, but they'll give you just as good a deal as the vendor, like for like, because of extended staffing. But now consider a completely different thing that they do. Internal IT staff typically study all the PCs in the world, which is, of course, an ever-changing mix, and recommend a few safe configurations for the company. It's kind of like an underwriter's laboratory or a consumer report. Of course, once we know those safe configurations, we can mail order them pretty cheaply. If you take the cost of that consumer report function and amortize it into your price per PC, you look uncompetitive, and that's unfair. The truth is, we want internal IT to do the consumer report function, whether we buy any PCs from them or not. It should not be amortized into the price per PC, but rather should be paid for in its own right as another deliverable. It's another service IT does. This is a perfect example of a corporate good activity that should be priced in its own accord, not spread into the costs of products and services.
What about the opposite situation, Dean? There is no cost advantage to outsourcing, but the organization's executives are dissatisfied with the current services. Isn't that a clear case for outsourcing?
Dissatisfied with our internal staff, so what do? We go to outsourcing, which means we throw money at other people's shareholders, not just once, but forever, because we've got a broken internal service function. Expensive. What's the alternative? Invest one time in fixing what you've got. Invest one time in building a fundamentally healthy internal service provider that is a culture of customer focus and entrepreneurship, a structure that includes the account rep function, learning the budget by deliverables method, building an internal market economy such that the business units control your priorities. We can get it set up right to be the vendor of choice. And that one-time investment will then give you an internal service provider that will give you the best deal, generally better than outsourcing forevermore. I think this is good ROI.
I think what you're saying, Dean, is that you can take what looks like a bad situation, outsourcing, and convert it into an opportunity.
Being threatened with outsourcing, which some people read as being threatened with losing your job, can be a very positive thing. For one, it may give you the pressure you need to do that transformation. It may cause executives to rethink the way they're running that internal service provider and to invest in the health of that organization. And the second thing it does is give you some good benchmarks. You know, if they come back with a proposal, you can compare to your internal costs and understand where you're efficient and where you need to work. And another thing it does is give you an opportunity for extended staffing. There's no reason that that vendor proposal couldn't be incorporated into the internal service provider rather than viewed as a replacement. They can begin to learn what vendors offer and be better positioned to choose make versus buy. So there are a lot of good things in dialoguing with vendors.
How does an organization get started? What's a first step?
There are many possible first steps. One could be culture. As I said, it's fairly easy to fix culture. Another could be market economics, but I think for most, the first step is understanding the fundamentals and understanding costs. I'd like to see finance working with IT and other internal service providers on budget by deliverables to understand our internal costs in a comparable manner so that we can make those apples to apples comparisons. Without an understanding of our internal costs versus outsourcing, we're going on faith, we're taking guesses, and we're going to make the wrong decision.
We live in a changing world. Nothing stays the same. Something that looks like a core component today may not be tomorrow. How do you account for changing circumstances?
And it may be core again the day following. The answer is not to decide top-down once and for all, this is non-core, throw it out. That's like surgery with a butcher's axe. If you go with the extended staffing model, you've got people who know the business, managing those vendors, and making that make-buy decision in context, project by project, service by service, day by day. And it's a dynamic system that continually gets you the best deal. And that would be surgery with a scalpel.
As usual, Dean, you've given us a lot to think about. If our viewers could take one thought away from this discussion, what would you like it to be?
There's a mood in this country that's very disturbing. It seems so many executives are saying, what's in it for me now? Not for the organization, not next quarter. What's in it for me now? And that may cause them to make some short-term decisions that are really not good for shareholders or staff in the long term. I'd like executives to think about this. What legacy will you leave in your career? What kind of organization are you building? What kind of organization would make you proud? Is it one that's cutthroat, where you throw people out at the first sign of trouble? Or will you build an organization that invests in its people and invests in becoming both an employer of choice and the internal vendor of choice?
Dean Meyer, founder and president of NDMA Incorporated. Thanks for bringing us up to date.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to speak with you.